It is said that certain precious stones are lucky, but Mr. Boddy was not superstitious. Rubies were precious because they were valuable. That was all. There was a fortune to be made by anyone who invented a way of manufacturing artificial rubies. And when one of the guests found such a way, then surely it must lead to wealth and happiness. Good friends would share in the fortune, and neighbors rejoice in the success of their friends. Maybe. But maybe rubies are not so lucky, because good luck seemed to desert Arlington Hall just as surely as it deserted poor Mr. Boddy himself.
Well, what have we here? The old shackle on the feet. You ever tried this one, Green?
Look, Boddy, you promised me 10% of the sales of those rubies. You can't back out of it now.
10%? I don't recall any 10%.
Don't treat me like one of your yokels, Boddy. Without me, you never would have patented that formula. And who found a solicitor that was even more crooked than the patent? If it hadn't been for me, even Plum would have seen what was going on, and he'd own the patent now, not you. So, don't get too clever with me, eh?
And what would you do if I did get clever, eh, Mr. Green? Go to the police, who would surely lock you up, or go to Plum, who would then call the police. Or perhaps you might consider a more extreme solution.
You won't double-cross me, Boddy. You wait and see.
Wrench, fingerprints Mr. Boddy, Mrs. White, and Mrs. Peacock. A stain on the floor. Tests show it to be wine. A duster from the billiard room pushed down the back of the sofa. Tests show traces of Mr. Boddy's blood.
I don't want you involved in this thing, that's all.
What, Uncle Boddy using the professor's formula, or whatever it is? Are you involved with Boddy?
Yes. And it's all going wrong. That's why I don't want you involved.
But I am involved. I don't care what you've done.
All I can tell you is that if Boddy double-crosses me, we're going to lose the money we need to get married. I'm still here to get married. I've got to find out whether Plum kept any records of his formula or of the first rubies he made. I can't trust Boddy if anything goes wrong and Plum gets the police involved.
Just tell me what to do. Nobody is going to harm you.
If Plum gets to those rubies first, then there's only one way left to stop Boddy from taking me down with him.
Fire grate, ash and fragments of paper. Plum's signature identified.
Boddy was a bully. He made promises, then managed to wriggle out of them by his own form of blackmail. I helped him with the rubies deal, and he had promised me 10%, which could have amounted to a lot of money. I needed that money because I wanted to marry Miss Scarlet. She couldn't get hold of her money, but that's for her to tell you. I did say something to Miss Scarlet about getting rid of Boddy. I hope I didn't give her the wrong impression. But I have an alibi for the whole period. I was in the lounge with Mrs. Peacock and Miss Scarlet, hoping for a game of cards. Then eventually I went along to the conservatory. Plum came in just after me, followed by Mustard. And that's it. Look, with respect, I'm hardly a mechanic. I haven't seen a wrench, and I've had far too much in my mind to notice something like that. I'd better tell you that Boddy more or less threatened me with a lead pipe in the hall. He made some remark about me wanting to kill him with it, presented it to me. I threw it back in the cupboard. Somehow, I don't think that Boddy was joking.
This is going to sound terrible, but I'm glad Uncle Boddy's dead. You see, he was hurting so many people, and there seemed to be no way out. Mr. Green hinted that he could have gone to jail because of his involvement, and he even hinted that there was only one way out. But it couldn't have been him, I'm sure. After dinner, we were hoping to play bridge in the lounge, but there were only 3 of us, Mrs. Peacock, Mr. Green and I. The Colonel usually made up the 4th, but he didn't turn up. After a while, we all wandered out. Mrs. Peacock left first, and I followed. I noticed she was in the study with Mrs. White, so I joined them there. No, I'm sorry. I don't remember seeing anything like that at all. I'm not even sure I know what you're talking about. If there was such a thing, it would be in the cupboard in the hall with all the other junk. No, I certainly have not seen a lead pipe. If this were a game, I'd assume it was some kind of trick question. Spot the odd one out. Is it lead, is it brass, or is it copper? But the answer is still no. I haven't seen a lead pipe.
A duster from the rope lying under the table.
Come on, Professor. It's no use standing there feeling sorry for yourself.
I can't believe he trampled all over me like that.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
But you know, that man still had the letter with the details of my formula. He had the nerve to wave it in front of my face.
Well, why don't you get it back? That way you could prove that the formula was yours.
He's got it locked away in the study.
Oh, come on, Professor. What are you, a man or a mouse?
Well, what am I going to do?
I don't care what you do. Brain him if he won't listen. And if you don't, I probably will.
There is a safe concealed in the sideboard, but there is nothing of interest in it.
Yes, I saw it. Boddy had what you describe as the wrench. He was trying to free the lock on the cupboard in the library with it. I was with him at the time, and I did handle it briefly. Oh, I don't know what happened to it after that. No, I have not seen a rope. Had I seen one, no doubt I would have been tempted to use it. One or two candidates immediately spring to mind. I'm sorry, I can't help you. I haven't seen anything resembling a lead pipe in this house. Boddy once showed me the candlesticks in the dining room. He was rather proud of them. I'm afraid they made little impact on me. No, I can't remember seeing them on this occasion. I'm sorry. I'm sure you must have realized by now that Boddy was poised to ruin my whole life with this wretched rubies business. It was enough that he stole the professor's formula, but then to launch a product in direct competition with my family's jewelry business was beyond belief. I asked him to delay just to give us some time, but he refused. That is why I did nothing when I saw Mr. Green in the ballroom. He was staring at something on the top of the piano. He was fascinated. Then he picked it up, and I'm perfectly certain that it was a gun. Of course I knew that Boddy kept a gun. Most of us knew that. But it was usually kept under lock and key. I cannot swear that I saw it, but I'm fairly certain that it was a gun that Mr. Green was looking at with such horror in the ballroom earlier.
Rope? What on earth would I want with a rope? Well, I've no idea if Boddy keeps rope in the house. Well, I've certainly not seen any. What an extraordinary idea. No, I haven't seen one at all. Sorry. Boddy's revolver. Yes, I took it from Miss Scarlet earlier today. I found her in the ballroom waving it about. She was quite clearly distressed. I managed to get it from her and took her off to calm her down. Now, I did leave the gun behind, intending to go back for it when I dealt with Miss Scarlet. However, what with one thing and another... well, yes, I did have contact with the lead pipe, yes. You see, I had this ridiculous idea of frightening Boddy with it, but fortunately for me, he was with somebody at the time, and I never got a chance to use it. I got it from the hall cupboard. I saw it there earlier. In the end, I never did anything with it. I stuffed it in the cupboard in the billiard room. It's all rather embarrassing, really, but there you are. Look here, I know there are some candlesticks in the dining room, but unless somebody actually started pouring gravy from them, I wouldn't notice them. Well, it's not the kind of thing that registers with me, I'm afraid. I mean the candlesticks, not the gravy. Boddy had the most peculiar sense of humour, and that was the least of his problems. I saw him in the lounge, bending over the fireplace and burning a document. Perhaps not too odd in itself, but why he found it so amusing I couldn't say. Nobody found him amusing, I can assure you. I actually had to prevent his niece, Miss Scarlet, from going after him with a gun earlier in the day. Extraordinary as it may seem, she was just wandering into the ballroom with it, looking dazed. Thought she might have had a shot at him already, but apparently not. Anyway, I managed to wrestle the thing off her. We had a bit of a tussle, actually.
The cookbook contains a carbon copy of a letter from Professor Plum to Mr. Boddy, accompanying the prototype synthetic rubies. Two candlesticks, one clean with no fingerprints, the other with fingerprints of Professor Plum.
I don't suppose old Plum would have ever gone ahead with this ruby business if he'd known the trouble it was going to cause.
Well, don't start blaming him for what Mr. Boddy's done. Nobody forced Mr. Boddy to steal his idea, did they? Now, why don't you stop worrying about whose invention it was and do something useful? You can get me some string from that cupboard.
Hardly affects you, does it?
Doesn't affect me. Well, you people never did look beyond the end of your noses, did you? I know more than you think about the professor's invention.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
You see, I helped the professor write that letter to Mr. Boddy. I typed it for him. The letter with the formula in it. I kept a carbon copy of that letter.
Where is it? Can I see it?
No, you may not see it. But it's safe. I shall choose the time when it's right to use it.
A wrench? No, I cannot recall seeing anything like that in the house. You do mean a wrench, an adjustable wrench? Although I suppose it makes little difference if you're hit over the head with it. No, I have no recollection of seeing a gun this weekend. I do believe it's the kind of thing I would have noticed, had it been in the vicinity. However, I am now certain that I heard a gun being fired in the ballroom. Yes, Mrs. White dragooned me into carrying one of them from the dining room to the kitchen. She was in the middle of spring cleaning, I think. I took it into the kitchen. That's all I can remember about it. You really do ask the most extraordinary questions. If I were about to kill Boddy, the last thing on earth I would use is a lead pipe. Think of the mess. I would surely use something a little less primitive. Well, to answer your question, I have not seen a lead pipe. No, I have not seen any rope. It's hardly the kind of thing Mrs. White would allow in her domain, is it? She's far too house-proud to allow great hunks of rope to float about the place. If there was any, it would have been in a cupboard somewhere.
By now, everybody must know that Boddy had stolen my formula for synthetic rubies and was about to market it under his own patent. It could have made me a fortune, but Boddy obviously saw the opportunity was too good to miss, and he didn't mind who got hurt in the process. He treated everybody with equal contempt. That's why, when I heard raised voices in the ballroom, I was not surprised, nor did I interfere. One of the voices was Miss Scarlet's, but I could not say who the man was. As I walked away, I distinctly heard what sounded like a shot. Perhaps at that point, I should have gone back.
The cookbook.
I went into the library, and there was this great dirty wrench lying on the bookcase. I couldn't believe that anybody could be so careless. It could have scratched that bookcase, and it's a very old one. I put the wrench back in the cupboard in the hall. I know where Mr. Boddy keeps that gun, but I can't remember seeing him with it for ages now. He'd go for weeks without using it, and then he'd use it for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. Target practice, he used to call it. No, he hasn't used it recently, at least not that I know of. Yes, of course I've seen the candlesticks. I see them every day. I had them down to give them a good polish earlier on. Professor Plum was in the dining room at the time, so I got him to carry one of them into the kitchen for me. I put them in the cupboard until I was ready. Yes, I saw the lead pipe, but I don't think it's my place to go around naming names. All I will say is that I saw it with a gentleman going towards the billiard room. Yes, and there's nothing odd about having rope around the place. I have some in the kitchen cupboard. In fact, when I asked Mr. Green to bring me some string to tie up the rubbish I was throwing out, he got me the rope instead. I think it's still in the dining room. Everybody assumed that it didn't matter to me about the rubies. They thought that the only ones to be hurt were the Professor and Mrs. Peacock. Nobody knew that the Professor had promised to buy me a little cottage to retire to, and I don't suppose anybody cared. You'd have thought that it didn't matter much to the Colonel either, but I expect he was thinking about Mrs. Peacock. Thinks a great deal of that lady, if you ask me. Anyway, that's the only explanation I can come up with for what he was doing, marching down the corridor, brandishing a huge piece of old pipe. He was heading for the library.
Gun recently fired. Fingerprints Mr. Green and Colonel Mustard. A single bullet hole. The drawer is empty.
Yeah. What on earth are you doing wandering around with that? That's Boddy's gun, isn't it?
Yes, I took it from the study.
Oh, well, guns don't solve problems, believe me, I should know.
I was desperate. I had to do something. If Uncle Boddy had released some of my trust money, we wouldn't be in all this trouble now.
You and Mr. Green?
Jonathan said he could go to jail if Uncle Boddy went ahead with marketing his rubies. And Professor Plum kicked up a row with the police. He couldn't survive in jail, Colonel. I just know he couldn't.
No. You may be right, my dear, but this is no way to do things. Boddy is a very dangerous man. Now.
No!
Prototype rubies. Fingerprints Mrs. Peacock and Mr. Boddy.
simply don't understand, my dear.
Oh, yes, I do. I see you all moping around, wrapped up in your own problems. And not one single one of you ever thinks what's going to happen to me. Well, I helped Professor Plum with the formula, and he said that he would buy me a cottage so that I could get away from Mr. Boddy. I have always hated that man. And now it looks as though I'm going to be with him for good. Unless I can prove that Professor Plum invented the formula for the rubies, which I can. Because I know where Mr. Boddy put the rubies when Professor Plum gave them to him. He used to call them his prototypes.
Lead pipe in drawer. Fingerprints smudged, but identifiable as Mr. Green's, Mr. Boddy's, and Colonel Mustard's. A stain. Tests show it to be Mr. Boddy's blood. A stain on the floor. Tests show it to be whiskey.
Remember what I said, Green? I just want to make sure that Mrs. Peacock comes out of this in one piece.
If she goes broke because of something Boddy does, I'm sorry, I can't help.
On the contrary, my dear chap. I believe that you can help. Didn't you help Mr. Boddy find Reynolds, his solicitor? And I know that Reynolds is a crook.
What's that got to do with me?
I'll tell you exactly what it's got to do with you. You are mixed up with Boddy in this patent business, aren't you?
Are you threatening me, Colonel?
No, my dear chap. I just wanted to make absolutely certain that we understood each other. It is rather complex, isn't it?
Lock forced. Books in cupboard. Fingerprints on cupboard door. Mrs. Peacock and Mr. Boddy. The fireplace contains no evidence.
If you intend to go ahead with this, you will destroy my family's jewelry business. As a gentleman, you owe it to me.
Oh, don't beg. It doesn't suit you. Ah, I knew I had Plum's rubies somewhere. Rather good, aren't they?
You rat, Boddy. You told me the professor's formula was worthless, and all the time you've been working on it for yourself. If you don't give me these 2 weeks, you'll destroy us. And I'm not about to let that happen, I can assure you.
Bravely said. That's the spirit I like to hear.
Will you hold back?
No.
If I were a man, I would kill you now.
The window is broken. A drawer forced. Inside, a damaged presentation box containing prototype rubies. Fingerprints, Professor Plum. A drawer forced.
You know these rubies are identical to the ones I sent you with a formula. How could you say they aren't? They're exactly the same.
Really, Plum, you are slow on the uptake. Your ideas didn't work in production. Your rubies were a fluke, a one-off. I had to chuck out most of what you did.
I gave you my formula in trust, Buddy. You said you'd get one of your people to look it over and see if it was viable. And now you've patented it as your own idea.
You sent me an idea for making synthetic rubies. A marvelous idea. But it didn't work. I developed a formula that did, and that formula is now my patent. It has nothing to do with you, Plum. Now get out before I throw you out.
That's right, Buddy. First steal my ideas, and then threaten me. That's about your level, isn't it, eh? Eh? I'll show you what I think of your patent.
I had decided that I'd had enough of Boddy's thoughtless behavior. What he did to Plum was disgraceful, but Plum can fight his own battles. It was the shabby way in which he treated Mrs. Peacock that I found intolerable. Now, I decided to have it out with him. I even picked up a piece of lead pipe to take with me, although what I was planning to do with it I couldn't tell you. I knew Boddy would be in the library, so I marched along there. But when I arrived, he was involved in what sounded like a serious conversation with Mrs. Peacock. I got the distinct impression that I should not intrude. So, I beat a hasty retreat. You mean Boddy's knife? Oh, yes, I know that knife. It was one of his favourite things. I can't recall seeing it this weekend, though. No, I'm sorry, I can't help you, I'm afraid.
You think the murder took place in the billiard room? Which? And this is your accusation?
You think the murderer was Colonel Mustard in the billiard room with the knife?
Well done. You've got everything right. You've solved the murder mystery. Now, let's go through it stage by stage and see what happened.
The Colonel was very attached to Mrs. Peacock, despite her understanding with Mr. Boddy. He had always cared for her, but now it looked as if what Mr. Boddy was doing would lead to bankruptcy for Mrs. Peacock. Colonel Mustard was not the man to stand aside when a lady's reputation was at stake, especially Mrs. Peacock's. During dinner, the Colonel had asked if Mr. Boddy could see him for a word. Mr. Boddy had suggested that they have this little word over a frame of snooker. After dinner, Colonel. The Colonel had agreed. Colonel Mustard now had to find a weapon. He'd been watching Mrs. Peacock during the day, and he knew that she had broken into a cupboard and found the Professor's rubies. Mrs. Peacock had used a knife, and the Colonel knew where she'd hidden it, in the ballroom. He found the knife and went to the billiard room. Mr. Boddy was there, wiping his cue with a duster, his back to the table. The Colonel struck at once. Mr. Boddy fell back onto the table, leaving a bloodstain that the Colonel could not remove. He picked up Mr. Boddy's duster, and he used it to clean the knife. Then he went to the conservatory and left the knife with some gardening implements that lay on the table. He hurried back to the lounge to see if he could join the game of bridge, but the lounge was empty. He realized he still had the duster in his pocket, so he pushed it down the back of the sofa and hurried back to the conservatory.
And there you have it. That's how Mr. Boddy met his fate. Why not come back again and see if you can solve the next murder at Arlington Hall?